She used a stick to take my sight, so I grew up in the dark to take her empire. I'm Bennett, and I'm back for everything. My dear friends, before we continue, please take a moment to subscribe, like, and share this story with your loved ones. Your support means so much to me. Thank you from my heart. People see a big house and they think everything inside is gold. They see the marble pillars, they see the gold-plated gates, and they think, man, the people living there must be the happiest people on earth. My father, Arthur, was that man. He was the lion of the village. When his car drove down the street, a long black Mercedes that purred like a satisfied cat, people would literally stop walking. They would bow their heads. They would whisper his name like he was a god. He owned the lands, he owned the warehouses, and he owned the respect of every man from here to the coast. But inside that mansion, behind those heavy oak doors that cost more than a common man's life savings, there was a secret. And well, that secret was me. My name is Bennett. I want you to understand something before we go any further. I wasn't born in the dark. I wasn't born with this stick in my hand. No. I remember what a sunrise looks like. I remember the way the orange light hits the dust in the morning. I remember the deep, vibrating green of the forest after a heavy rain. I remember the blue of the sky, that bright, endless blue that makes you feel like you can fly. I had eyes. I had perfect eyes. But then came Zelda. Zelda was my father's second wife. My mother. She passed away when I was very small, and my father, in his loneliness and his pride, brought Zelda into our home. She was beautiful, yes. She walked like a queen. But her heart was a cold, dark place where nothing kind could grow. She didn't want a stepson. She especially didn't want a stepson who reminded Nathan of his first wife. She wanted to be the only star in that house. She saw me as a shadow on her bright future. She would look at me with these cold, sharp eyes that felt like needles on my skin. She would wait for my father to leave for his business trips, and the moment his car cleared the gate, the mask would fall. The smiles would vanish. The sweet stepmother was gone, and in her place was a woman who hated the very ground I walked on. She decided very early on that my light was just too bright for her comfort, and she was going to make sure that light went out, forever. I'll never forget it. Just burned into my brain. I was just 7 years old. Think about that. At 7, you think the world is a playground. You are safe in your own kitchen. I was hungry. I had gone into the kitchen to find a snack. There was a beautiful ceramic plate sitting on the counter. It was one of Zelda's favorites, brought all the way from Europe. I reached for it, my small fingers trembling a bit because I knew I wasn't supposed to touch her things. And then, crash. The sound was like a lightning bolt in the quiet house. The plate shattered into 1,000 white pieces on the floor. My heart stopped. I stood there looking at the mess, my breath catching in my throat. Before I could even move to pick up a piece, the door swung open. It was Zelda. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't check if I had cut myself. She looked at the broken plate and then she looked at me. Her face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. She didn't see a child who made a mistake, she saw an eyesore. She saw a reason to finally do what she had been wanting to do for months. "You useless, clumsy brat," she screamed. Her voice was like a saw cutting through wood. She didn't reach for a towel. She reached behind the door where my father kept a thick, heavy walking stick made of solid teak wood. It was heavy. It was meant for a grown man. She grabbed it with both hands. I remember the whistle, that terrifying whoosh it made in the air before it hit my face. What? The first hit caught me across the temple. I fell to the floor, my head spinning, the white tiles of the kitchen turning red with my blood. I tried to scream, but the second hit came faster. This one hit me directly across my eyes. It felt like an explosion. It felt like someone had poured boiling oil into my skull. I didn't see stars. I saw a flash of white light so bright it blinded me, and then, nothing. She didn't stop. She beat me mercilessly, the stick rising and falling while I huddled on the floor amongst the broken ceramic. I remember the smell of her perfume mixed with the smell of my own blood. I remember the sound of her breathing, heavy, angry like a demon. Eventually the pain became too much and the world just blurred. Everything went quiet. When I woke up days later in a dark room, I asked someone to turn on the lights. They told me the lights were already on. That was the moment I realized. The sun was gone. It has been nighttime for me ever since. And the worst part? My father was in the room and he didn't say a word. My father, Arthur. Man, that was the biggest heartbreak of all. Can you imagine? A man so rich he could buy anything, yet so poor in spirit he couldn't protect his own flesh and blood. Zelda had convinced him. She told him that a blind son was a curse on the family name. She told him that if the business community found out his heir was broken, they would think he was weak. She played on his pride like a musician plays a guitar. And my father? He listened. He was ashamed of me. He didn't take me to the best doctors in the world. He didn't fly me to America or London to see if my sight could be saved. No. He told the neighbors and his business partners that I had caught a terrible fever and had been sent away to a special school in a distant city. He lied to the world to save his ego. But the truth? The truth was much uglier. I was moved out of my beautiful bedroom with the soft sheets and the view of the garden. I was taken to the boys' quarters at the very back of the property, a small stone room that used to be for storage. It was damp. It was cold. It was the place where they put things they wanted to forget. I became a ghost in my own home. Zelda told the servants I was a bad omen. She told them not to speak to me. I ate leftovers, the cold scraps that were left after my father and Zelda had finished their 5-course meals. I wore rags because the blind don't need fashion. I spent years in that room. I learned the geography of those 4 walls by touch. I knew every crack in the plaster. I knew the exact sound the door made when it creaked open. I sat there day after day listening. That was when my hearing became my superpower. I could hear the sound of my father's expensive cars, the low rumble of the engines, driving in and out of the gate. I could hear the laughter from the parties they held in the main house. I could hear the clinking of champagne glasses and the music. And I would sit there in a room that smelled like dust and loneliness and I would wonder, does he even remember I'm here? Does he know I'm hungry? Does he know I'm cold? I was 18 years old before I felt the sun on my face again. 10 years of living like a prisoner for a crime I didn't commit. 10 years of Zelda's footsteps echoing in the hallway, reminding me that I was nothing. But they forgot one thing. They thought that by taking my eyes they had taken my soul. They didn't realize that in the silence of that dark room I was growing. I was listening. And I was waiting. World shuts all the doors, God opens a tiny window. For me that window was named Peter. Peter was the gardener. He was an old man with hands as rough as tree bark and a voice that sounded like gravel grinding together, but man, he had a heart of pure gold. Zelda had told all the staff to stay away from the cursed boy in the back room. She threatened to fire anyone who even looked at the boys' quarters. But Peter didn't care about Zelda's threats. He had seen me when I was a little boy running around with my sight, and his heart couldn't take the cruelty. Every afternoon, when the sun was at its hottest and Zelda was taking her nap in the air-conditioned mansion, I would hear it. Tap, tap, a soft knock on my wooden window. "Bennett? You awake, boy?" he would whisper. I would crawl to the window, my hands feeling the rough stone of the wall. "I'm here, Peter," I'd say, my voice cracking because I hadn't used it in days. Peter would sneak me real food, not the scraps from the bin but fresh bread, mangoes from the trees he tended, and sometimes even a piece of fried fish he'd hidden in his pocket. But the food wasn't the best part. No, the best part was the books. Peter couldn't read very well himself, but he would go to the trash cans of the rich neighbors and find old newspapers and discarded books. He would sit by my window for hours, struggling through the words, reading them out loud to me. He taught me about the world beyond the gate. He told me about the big cities, about the laws of the land, about how businesses worked. "Bennett," he told me one day, and I'll never forget the weight of his words, "your father built these walls to hide you. Zelda beat you to break you. But listen to me, boy, your mind is a kingdom. They can't lock up your thoughts. They can't blind your brain. You have to learn. You have to soak up every word I read like a sponge. Because one day these walls are going to fall, and if you are empty inside you will stay a beggar. But if you are full, you will be a king." We did this for years. While Zelda thought I was rotting away in the dark, Peter was feeding my soul. He taught me how to visualize. He'd describe a flower until I could see the red of the petals in my mind. He'd describe the stock market, news from the paper until I understood how money moved. He was my school, my library, and my only friend. He saved my life and he didn't even have a penny to his name. By the time I was 18, I wasn't that scared little 7-year-old anymore. I was tall. My shoulders were broad. My ears were so sharp I could hear a bird land on the roof from a mile away. But I was still a prisoner. Then came that night. The night the golden house finally spat me out. It was raining hard. One of those African storms where the sky just opens up and tries to drown the earth. The door to my room slammed open. I didn't need eyes to know it was Zelda. I could smell her expensive, suffocating perfume. I could hear the sharp, angry click-clack of her heels on the stone floor. "Get up," she hissed. Her voice was full of a new kind of hate. I stood up, my head nearly touching the ceiling of that small room. I didn't say a word. Your father is away in Europe for a month, she said, and I could hear the smirk in her voice. I'm tired of looking at this building. I'm tired of knowing you're breathing my air. You're 18 now. You're a man. Go and be a man in the streets. She grabbed my arm, her grip was like a vice, and dragged me toward the back gate. I stumbled, my feet bare on the wet ground. She opened the small service gate and shoved me out into the mud and the pouring rain. Here, she said. I heard something thud into the mud next to me. A bag of coins. It's more than you're worth. Don't ever come back. If I see you near this gate again, I'll tell the police you're a thief and they'll finish what I started with that stick. Slam. The gate locked. I heard her walking away, laughing to herself. There I was, 18 years old. Barefoot. Soaking wet in a thunderstorm. I reached into the mud and found the small pouch of coins. It wasn't much, just enough to buy bread for a week. I stood up, shivering, the rain lashing against my face. I had no idea which way was north or south. I had no idea where the road was. But for the first time in 11 years, I wasn't behind a locked door. The air felt huge. The world felt endless. I gripped my wooden stick, the one Peter had carved for me, and I started to walk. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing for sure. Zelda thought she was throwing away trash. She didn't realize she was releasing a lion. Let me tell you something. The first night of freedom for a blind man is not a dream. It is a nightmare. You don't realize how loud the world is until you are in the middle of it without a wall to protect you. Every car that passed sounded like a giant beast trying to swallow me. Every person who brushed past me felt like a threat. I could hear people whispering, "Look at that poor boy," or, "Move out of the way, you blind beggar." The rain didn't stop. By midnight I was shaking so hard my teeth were rattling. I found my way to a bridge. I could hear the echo of the water underneath and the roar of the tires above. I crawled into a corner, pressing my back against the cold concrete. I clutched that bag of coins to my chest like it was a heart. I cried, Bennett. I really cried. I wasn't crying because I was blind. I was used to that. I was crying because of the cruelty of it all. How can a father let this happen? How can a woman be so heartless? God, I whispered into the dark, if you are there, don't let the dogs eat me tonight. Just give me a chance to show them. Just one chance. I didn't sleep. I listened to the sounds of the night. I heard the footsteps of people I knew were dangerous. I heard the stray dogs fighting over scraps. But every time I felt like giving up, I heard Peter's voice in my head, "The world is wider than your father's walls." I realized then that I had two choices. I could sit under this bridge and wait to die, or I could use the ears God gave me to build a new life. I wiped the mud and tears from my face. The sun began to rise. I could feel the heat on my skin even if I couldn't see the light. I stood up. My stomach was screaming for food, but my heart was screaming for more. I tapped my stick on the ground. I started walking toward the sound of the city. I was a beggar today, yes. But I promised the wind, the rain, and the bridge I would not be a beggar tomorrow. I spent the next few weeks living on the edge of the world. I was begging for scraps, yes, but I wasn't like the other beggars. I didn't just sit there with a bowl waiting for pity. No, I used my ears. I sat near the gates of the great university in the city. Why? Because that's where the smart people were. That's where the big conversations happened. I would sit there for hours, listening to students argue about politics, listening to lecturers talk about the economy. I was hungry for food, but I was starving for knowledge. One afternoon, a heavy rain started to fall. Everyone was running for cover. I heard the frantic ruffling of papers and the heavy rhythmic thud of a man struggling with something big. I heard a suitcase burst open, snap, and dozens of papers hit the wet pavement. Oh no, not today. My research, a man's voice cried out. He sounded old, tired, and desperate. I didn't think twice. I stood up from my cardboard mat. I followed the sound of the papers flapping in the wind. I knelt down, my hands moving like lightning across the wet ground. I could feel the texture of the paper. I gathered them into a neat pile, shielding them from the rain with my own ragged shirt. Sir, over here. I have them. I shouted over the thunder. A pair of heavy shoes splashed toward me and stopped. Young man, how did you find those? You can't see. I stood up, soaking wet, handing him the stack of papers. I don't need eyes to hear where your hard work fell, sir. My name is Bennett. Let me help you to your car. He laughed, a deep, warm sound that felt like a hug. I am Professor George. And Bennett, I have 2 PhDs, but I was too foolish to check the latch on my briefcase. You have saved my life's work. Come with me. You can't stay in this rain. He didn't give me a coin and walk away. He took me to his office. He gave me a dry towel and a hot cup of tea. He sat across from me and asked, "How does a boy with your spirit end up on a street corner?" I told him everything. I told him about the mansion, about the stick, and about Zelda. By the time I finished, the professor was silent. Then he said, "Bennett, I cannot give you back your eyes. But I can give you a different kind of sight. I will give you a job cleaning my office, but your real pay will be the books in this room." For the next 3 years, I lived in a world of dots and sounds. While my father was probably hosting gala dinners in the village, I was sitting on the floor of Professor George's library. He bought me my first Braille machine. Do you know what that felt like? To run my fingers over those raised dots and feel a word for the first time? It was like a spark of electricity hitting my brain. I didn't sleep much. I would stay up until 3 a.m., my fingers moving across pages of history, economics, and law. I learned about how the stock market worked, how a rumor in America could make a man rich in Africa. I learned about property law, about how land is bought and sold. I was obsessed. The professor started giving me more responsibility. "Bennett, listen to this recording of my lecture and tell me if the logic is sound," he'd say. I would listen once, just once, and I could repeat his entire hour-long speech word for word. People at the university started to notice. They didn't call me the blind beggar anymore. They started calling me the computer. Students would come to me to ask for help with their assignments. I could hear a math problem and solve it in my head before they could even finish writing it on the board. I realized something powerful during those long nights. Zelda had tried to bury me, but she didn't realize I was a seed. My eyes were gone, but my vision was getting sharper every day. I began to understand the world better than the people who could see it. While they were distracted by colors and faces, I was focused on the truth, the numbers, and the patterns. I was becoming a weapon, and I was just waiting for the right time to strike. 6 hours of sitting in the back of that car, feeling the vibrations of the road beneath me. As we got closer, the air changed. It lost the smell of city smog and started to smell like red earth, wood smoke, and the bitter scent of the neem trees. My childhood. I didn't say a word to the driver. I just sat there, my hands folded over the head of my mahogany stick. I was dressed in a suit that cost more than my father used to make in a month. I had a gold watch on my wrist that ticked with a precision my father never had. "We're here, sir," the driver said. I felt the car slow down as we turned onto the gravel path. I rolled down the window. The sound was different now. The mansion used to sound like a hive of activity, servants shouting, music playing, cars coming and going. Now, it sounded like a graveyard. I could hear the wind whistling through the cracks in the gate. I could hear the overgrown weeds rubbing against the car's tires. "Don't honk the horn," I commanded. "Just pull up to the front steps and wait." I wanted to feel the silence. I wanted to hear the sound of a falling empire before I made my presence known. I remembered exactly where the fountain used to be. It was silent now, the water long since dried up. I remembered where the rose bushes were. Now they were just thorns and dry sticks. The house was dying just like the man inside it. I opened the car door myself. I stepped out, my boots hitting the cracked pavement with a solid thud. I stood there for a moment, adjusting my dark glasses. I knew I looked like a king, but inside, for a split second, I was that 7-year-old boy again, wondering if I was about to get hit. But then I gripped my stick. I wasn't that boy anymore. "Who is that? Get out of here. This property is under legal dispute." It was her. Zelda. I would know that voice anywhere. It was thinner now, like a piece of dry parchment, but it still had that sharp, jagged edge of arrogance. I heard her shoes, cheap plastic sandals now, not the designer heels, clicking toward me. "Did you hear me? The bank has already taken everything. There's nothing left to steal," she screamed. I didn't answer. I just stood there, tall and silent, letting the sun hit my face. I heard her stop about 5 feet away. I could hear her breathing, shallow and fast. She was looking at the car, looking at my suit, looking at my face. Who are you?" she asked, her voice finally trembling. "Are you the new owner? Did you buy the debt?" I took a slow step forward. I didn't need to see her to know she was flinching. "You used to tell me that I was a cursed Zelda," I said, my voice low and steady. "You told me that a blind man has no place in a house like this. You told me to go and die in the streets." I heard her gasp. It was a sound of pure terror, like she had just seen a dead man walking. "Bennett?" she whispered. No, Bennett is dead. He died years ago. You're a ghost." "I am the ghost you created, Zelda," I said. "And I've come back to see what's left of your kingdom." At that moment, I heard the front door of the mansion groan open. I heard the heavy, dragging footsteps of an old man. My father. He was coughing, a deep, wet cough that spoke of a broken body. Zelda? Who is it? Is it the police? He called out. I turned my head toward the sound of his voice. My father. The lion. He sounded like a wounded animal. My heart didn't break for him. It didn't burn with rage. Just felt cold. The reckoning had finally arrived. I heard my father's cane hitting the stone steps. Thump. It was a hollow sound, the sound of a ma who no longer had any ground to stand on. He reached the bottom of the stairs and I could hear his heavy, ragged breathing just a few feet away. Zelda, why aren't you answering me? Who is this man? Arthur asked. His voice? Man, it was a ghost of the thunderous roar I remembered from my childhood. It was weak. It was the voice of a man who had spent too many nights staring at the ceiling, wondering where it all went wrong. I turned my body toward him. I took off my sunglasses, letting him look directly into the eyes that Zelda had tried to extinguish all those years ago. I am the son you buried while he was still breathing, father. The silence that followed was so absolute, I could hear a leaf fall from a tree 100 yards away. I heard my father's cane hit the floor, clack, as his hand lost its grip. Bennett, he whispered. It wasn't a question, it was a prayer. Bennett, is it really you? He reached out. I could feel his hand, thin and shaking like a dry leaf, touch the sleeve of my suit. He felt the expensive fabric. He felt the strength in my arm. He started to sob. Not a dignified cry, but a messy, ugly wail of a man who realized he had thrown away a diamond and kept a bag of charcoal. My son, they told me you were gone. Zelda said you ran away to the city and disappeared. I was a coward, Bennett. I was a coward. I didn't move. I didn't embrace him. I stood as still as a statue. You weren't just a coward, Arthur. You were an accomplice. You sat in that dining room and ate your steak while I ate scraps in a stone room. You drove your Mercedes while I sat in the dark. You didn't lose me, father. You threw me away. Zelda saw that I wasn't attacking, so her desperation turned into a different kind of weapon. She threw herself onto the ground. I felt her fingernails clawing at my shoes. Bennett? Oh, Bennett, thank God you're alive, she wailed. The hypocrisy in her voice was so thick I could almost taste it. I was only trying to make you strong. I was under a spell, I was stressed. The business was failing and I didn't want you to see us suffer. Please, you're a big man now. You're rich. Look at your car, look at your clothes. You must help us. She started listing their debts. She told me how the partners had tricked Arthur. She told me how the bank was coming at 8 a.m. the next morning to throw their suitcases into the dirt. She spoke as if I owed her something. As if the stick she used on me was just a tough lesson. I listened to her beg. I listened to my father's pathetic whimpering. I realized that for 20 years, I had built these people up to be giants in my head. I thought they were powerful monsters. But standing there, listening to them crawl in the dust of their own making, I realized they were small. They were tiny, hollow people who had nothing left but the clothes on their backs and a house that didn't belong to them anymore. The rich man is now a beggar in his own yard, I said, cutting through her lies. How does the dirt taste, Zelda? Is it as bitter as the leftovers you used to feed me? My driver stepped out of the car. Sir, the sun is setting. Shall we head back to the city? Zelda's grip on my legs tightened. No. Don't leave us. Bennett, they will take the bets. They will take the stove. We have nowhere to go. Your father is sick. He won't survive a night on the streets. I stood on the precipice of a great choice. In my pocket I had my checkbook. I had the power to buy the bank that was evicting them. I had the power to make them kings again. Or I could do what Zelda did to me. I could signal my driver, get back in my air-conditioned car, and watch in my mind's eye as they were dragged out into the mud the next morning. My heart was a battlefield. One side, the 7-year-old boy, wanted to hear the gate slam on them forever. He wanted them to feel the cold bridge and the monsters underneath. But the other side, the man I had become because of Peter the gardener and Professor George, that man knew that if I acted like Zelda, then Zelda had won. If I became a monster to fight a monster, then the light was truly gone. I looked down at the sound of Zelda's sobbing and my father's heavy, sick cough. Driver, I said, call my lawyers. Tell them to find the lead officer at the bank. Tell them I am purchasing the deed to this mansion in full. By tonight. Zelda let out a scream of joy. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Bennett. I knew you were a good bee. I'll get your old room ready. We can be a family again. Shut up, Zelda, I said, and my voice was like a guillotine. I am buying this house because it is my house. It was my mother's home before you poisoned it. I'm not buying it for you. You will stay here tonight? But tomorrow? The rules change. Tomorrow you find out what it's like to live in the shadow of the man you tried to kill. Mansion, but it didn't feel like the old days. The bankers arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, ready to throw the furniture into the driveway. They were loud, they were aggressive, until they saw my lawyer standing at the gate with the deed. I watched, or rather, I listened as the arrogance drained out of the room. My father and Zelda were standing in the hallway, clutching their few remaining bags, looking like two lost children. I felt Zelda's hands try to touch my arm again, but I stepped back. I remembered the weight of that wooden stick. I remembered the whistle it made in the air. "Bennett, honey," she started, her voice trying to sound sweet again, trying to find that old manipulation. "Now that you've saved the house, we should hire the old staff back. We need to throw a party to show the village that the family is back on top. We can show them that." "You told me I was an eyesore, Zelda," I interrupted. I didn't raise my voice, but the room went cold. "You told my father I would spoil the family image. Now look at the image of this family. It's broken, isn't it? It's held together by the curse you threw into the mud." I turned my head toward her. "The staff isn't coming back for you. The parties are over. You are not the mistress of this house anymore. You are a guest. And in my house, guests follow the rules." She went silent. I could hear her heart beating fast, not from love, but from the realization that her power was truly, finally dead. Later that afternoon I sat on the veranda. My father, Arthur, came out and sat on the steps near my feet. He didn't sit in his usual grand chair. He sat on the stone, sounding small and frail. "Bennett," he whispered, "I sat in that house for 10 years after you left. I watched her treat the servants like dirt. I watched her spend the money I worked so hard for. And every night, I looked at the door to the back quarters and I felt like a ghost was staring back at me. I was the head of the house, but I was a coward. A man who cannot protect his own son is no man at all." Hearing him admit it didn't give me the joy I thought it would. It just gave me a deep, heavy sadness. I realized he had been a prisoner too, a prisoner of his own pride and Zelda's lies. "I don't deserve to be called your father," he said, his voice breaking. "No, you don't," I replied honestly. "But you are still the man who gave me life. For the first time in 20 years, the darkness doesn't feel like a prison, Dad. It feels like I'm the only one here who can actually see the truth. You had eyes, but you were blind. Zelda had eyes, but she was blind. I was the one who learned to see in the dark." He reached out and touched my hand, but it wasn't the touch of a master, it was the touch of a man seeking mercy. I didn't pull away. I let him hold my hand. Not for his sake, but for mine. I was letting go of the anger so it wouldn't consume the empire I had built. My assistant, Willow, came out with the paperwork. She thought I was ready to leave. She thought I would just put them in a small apartment somewhere and sell the house. But I had a different plan. "Willow," I said, "we are moving my headquarters here. This mansion will no longer be a place of secrets. It will be a place of business. And as for my father and Sarah," I turned to where they were standing. "I'm not buying this house for your comfort. I am buying it because it's my childhood home. But I won't throw you into the street. A blind man knows exactly how cold and lonely the street is at 2 o'clock in the morning. I won't be like you. I won't use my power to crush the weak." I told them I would pay for their food, and their medicine. I would give them a roof over their heads. But the master bedroom? The one Zelda used to brag about with the balcony overlooking the village? That was mine now. They were moved to the small guest rooms in the back, ironically, right near the quarters where I was once hidden. "This is the price of your survival," I told Zelda. "You will live, but you will live in the reality of what you did. You will see my success every day, and you will know that the boy you beat with a stick is now the man who feeds you." I felt the power shift completely. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about the fact that I had kept my soul intact while they had lost theirs. I was the master of the Golden House now, and I was going to turn it into a beacon of light for everyone the world had forgotten. It was the silence of order. I moved into the master suite and I remember walking through those halls, my stick tapping against the expensive marble. Every echo felt like I was reclaiming a piece of my soul. But I didn't want Zelda sitting around eating my food and plotting her next move. No. She needed to learn the value of the things she had tried to destroy. I called her into the study one morning. I could hear her shuffling in, her spirit dampened, her voice small. "Martin? You called for me?" "I did," I said, not looking up from the Braille documents I was reading. "I've hired a cook. I've hired a nurse for my father. But I am not hiring a gardener. The grounds are a mess, Zelda. The roses are dead. The weeds are taking over the path where I used to walk. I heard her catch her breath. But Bennett, you know I don't do manual labor. My skin, the sun. Your skin will survive, I said, my voice as hard as stone. You will work in that garden. You will plant the flowers that I can smell but cannot see. You will prune the hedges. You will earn your bread by the sweat of your brow, just as I had to earn mine when you threw me out. From 7 a.m. until noon you belong to the earth. If the garden doesn't bloom, you don't eat at my table. Is that understood? She didn't argue. She had no money, no friends, and no pride left. The next morning I sat on the veranda with my coffee and I listened. I listened to the sound of her digging in the dirt. I heard her grunting as she pulled at the stubborn weeds. It wasn't revenge, Bennett, it was a lesson. I wanted her to see the beauty of growth and the pain of hard work. I wanted her to understand that the things she looked down upon were the very things that kept her alive. Once I had settled the house, my first priority wasn't business. It was a debt of the heart. I told my driver to take me to the small shack at the edge of the village where Peter, the old gardener, used to live. My heart was beating fast. I wanted to show him. I wanted to pull up in my big car, take his rough hands and say, "Peter, look, the world is wider than the walls." You were right. But when we arrived, the silence was different. It was the silence of an empty home. A neighbor came out, an old woman who smelled like wood smoke. "Peter? Oh, son. Peter passed away 2 years ago. He worked until his heart just gave out. He died with a book in his hand, you know? Always reading, that man." I sat in the back of my car and I wept. I wept harder than I did the night I was blinded. The man who had truly been a father to me was gone, and I never got to say thank you. But the old woman wasn't finished. "He left a daughter though," she said. "Young Mary. She's a bright girl, top of her class, but she had to drop out of the university. No money. She's working 3 jobs just to keep a roof over her head." I dried my eyes. I felt a surge of purpose. "Find her," I told my assistant. "Find Mary. And tell her that her father's special student has come to settle the bill." Within a few months, the entire village was talking. They had spent years believing I was a curse, a shame, or even dead. Now they saw the black SUVs. They saw the trucks delivering computers and books to the mansion. They saw the blind king walking through the market with his head held high. I found Mary. I didn't just pay her fees, I bought her a car and a small house near the university. "Your father gave me the world when I had nothing," I told her. "Now the world belongs to you." But the biggest change was in the mansion itself. People would walk by the gates and see the famous Zelda, the woman who used to ignore them, kneeling in the dirt, covered in soil, working under the hot sun. They saw Arthur, the broken lion, sitting on the porch, watching his son run a multi-million-dollar empire from a laptop he couldn't even see. The blind curse had become the village's greatest blessing. I started hiring the local youths. I started fixing the roads. I wasn't just a rich man, I was a man with a vision. I realized that my blindness had given me a superpower. I couldn't see the outside of people, their clothes, their beauty, or their skin, so I was forced to see their souls. And as the garden started to bloom under Zelda's tired hands, I realized that even the most bitter soil can grow something sweet if you give it enough time and a lot of truth. It was coming from the floor, right near my feet. "Zelda?" I asked. "Why are you out here at this hour?" I heard her move, the rustle of her dress against the ground. She wasn't sitting on a chair. She was sitting on the floor, right where she used to force me to sit. "Bennett," she whispered. Her voice was cracked, exhausted from months of labor in the sun. "I was sitting here looking at the garden. It's beautiful. Even in the dark, I can see the shapes of the flowers I planted. And I realized something. I spent my whole life thinking I was the one with the power because I had eyes that could see and hands that could take." She paused and I heard her take a shaky breath. "But I was the one who was truly blind, Bennett. I had eyes but I couldn't see the light in a child. I had a heart but I couldn't feel the pain I was causing. I looked at you and saw a curse, but the world looks at you and sees a miracle. I am so sorry, not just for the stick and not just for the room, but for being too blind to see that you were the best thing that ever happened to this family." For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to correct her or punish her. I heard the truth in her voice. It was the sound of a shattered ego. "Zelda," I said quietly, "the darkness taught me that people don't go blind because their eyes stop working. They go blind because their hearts stop loving. You finally started to see. That is enough." My father's health had been fading like a candle in the wind. The doctors told me his heart was simply tired. One rainy afternoon, the nurse called me to his room. The air smelled of medicine and old age. I walked to his bedside and reached out. His hand found mine. It was cold, so cold, and his grip was weak like a bird with a broken wing. "Bennett?" he gasped, his voice barely a whistle. "I'm going now. I can feel the shadows closing in. But before I go, I need to know. That boy, the 7-year-old boy I left in the kitchen that day, is he still in there? Can he ever forgive a man who was too small to be a father?" I sat there for a long time. I remembered the hunger. I remembered the cold stone room. I remembered the sound of his car driving away while I cried for help. But then I felt the warmth of his hand. I realized that holding on to the hate was like holding on to a hot coal. It was only burning me. "Dad," I said, leaning close so he could hear me, "the boy is okay. He grew up. He traveled the world. He built an empire. And the darkness taught him how to find his own way without needing a hand to lead him. I forgive you, Arthur. Go in peace." I felt a single tear drop onto my hand from his eyes. He squeezed my fingers one last time, let out a long, peaceful sigh, and then the room went silent. The lion of the village was gone. He died not as a rich man but as a man who was finally at the very last second honest. After the funeral, the village expected me to sell the house and go back to my big city office. They thought I would leave this shame behind. But they didn't know me. I called a team of architects and builders. "Tear down the walls of the back quarters," I told them. "Expand the kitchen. Turn the ballroom into a library. And the master suite? Turn it into a laboratory." I officially opened the Bennett and Peter Academy for the differently abled. I didn't want to live in a house full of sad memories. I wanted to fill those halls with the laughter of children whom the world had called broken. I wanted every blind child, every disabled child in our region to know that they didn't have to live in a stone room. The most amazing thing? Zelda stayed. She didn't have to. I gave her enough money to leave and start over. But she chose to stay as the school's matron. She became the woman who made sure the children were fed, that their beds were soft, and that no one ever used a stick for anything other than walking. She found her redemption in serving the very people she once despised. And me? I sat in my office in the center of the school, listening to the sound of children learning. I was still blind, yes. But I had never seen a more beautiful sight in my entire life. Never let a person who can't see your value make you feel worthless. My stepmother, Zelda, thought that by taking my eyes she was taking my future. She thought a stick could break a soul. But she was wrong. She had eyes, but she was blind to the truth. She was blind to the fact that greatness doesn't live in what you see. It lives in what you believe. If you are listening to this and you feel like you are in a dark place, if you feel like life has beaten you down, or your family has turned their back on you, look at me. I was a prisoner in a stone room. I was a beggar under a bridge. But I refused to let the darkness be my cage. I used it as my classroom. Remember these 3 things. Knowledge is your eyes. Learn everything you can. A man with a full mind can never stay a slave. Success is the loudest answer. You don't need to shout at your enemies. Build your empire until they have to look up to see you. Forgiveness is your power. Don't let your disability become your excuse. Use the very thing they mocked you for. Turn it into the thing that makes you impossible to ignore. Even in the darkest moments, even when everyone else says you can't. Rise. Or shine. My name is Bennett. My eyes are dark, but my life is full of light. And if I could find my way home from the dark, so can you. Remember this too. The sun doesn't stop shining just because someone closes their curtains. Thank you so much for watching this African tale. If this story touched your heart, don't just walk away. Subscribe to this channel right now. We are building a community of survivors and kings. Hit that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven Zelda? I want to hear your heart. And always remember, love, faith, and courage are the greatest treasures you can ever have. God bless you all. Bye.